Good evening. Welcome to our monthly Amherst School Board meeting, just a couple of weeks before Election Day. It is Thursday, February 22nd. I will call us to order here at 5:30 on the nose. Just changed 5:31 to add, counting it as on time. So we are going to get started on time tonight. We have 3 school board members in attendance, and then because of the respiratory virus season that we're seeing kick everybody's butt right now, we do have a couple of folks that are at home. So I will confirm first with Terry Beam that Terry, you are alone tonight and unable to make it into the, or was impractical to be able to make it to the meeting in person.
Yes to both.
And Mr. Jason White, I will ask you the same questions.
Yep, I am alone and unable to attend in person.
Great way to spend Massachusetts vacation week, huh, Jason? All right, so let's get started here tonight. We'll have our first order of business is the public input. I don't see anybody in person, Steve. Is there anybody joining us tonight online?
We have one person online, but there is no hand raised, and directions about public comment have been provided.
Thank you very much. So if you join us, we'll give it another minute here because I lost my Zoom window. I think I got logged out of Zoom, so I'll have to join the meeting. There we go. So as I work to get back into Zoom, I will move on to our next agenda item. We will have a presentation tonight. Ms. Kelly Blaze was, I don't know, was it technically a sabbatical? I don't recall off the top of my head. It was a research project in the, I'm sorry?
20 days.
20 days. There we go. If you'd like to have a seat at the table there, we can invite Kelly up. So Kelly went on a research trip to the South Pacific. And so now she has been kind enough to put together a presentation to share with us tonight. So Kelly, I will let you take it away and you can walk us through the presentation and your findings and some pretty awesome photography that we had here as a bit of a teaser beforehand.
Thank you. Am I allowed to stand? Yeah.
You are, if you're gonna stand, just maybe closer to the owl, just to make sure we can pick up the sound.
It feels weird to- I'm a teacher, we stand. So thank you so much for letting me come in and talk to you guys about this, and thank you so much for approving the trip in the first place. National Geographic partners with Lindblad Expeditions for expeditions across the world, every continent, every ocean, and they bring scientists with them. And this summer, they started piloting a program where they started attaching classroom teachers to that. So I applied through that. It was pretty extensive with written applications, interviews. Finally, in September, we got the okay that I was officially selected for an October expedition. So it was really fast and really go, go, go. Steve, are you doing? Thank you, Steve. Before the trip, we did a lot of pre-teaching. I worked with Beth Penny, who's the other 7th grade science teacher, and we did a lot of combined work for this. And the first thing we did with the kids was we looked at a map. We had a big, right outside my classroom door, we have a big Pacific-centered ocean map. And we looked at the map and we showed them, where is Amherst, New Hampshire? Where am I going on the expedition? And looking at the mileage, the route that I was taking was as if we drove from Amherst to California and then back again. It was a pretty long trip. We looked at pictures and videos of animals and different cultures that exist in those areas, but it wasn't until we watched a 2-minute video clip from Moana that it clicked for them. And we had been doing like 2 days of like research and looking at this, and then we watched a clip of Moana, and literally every kid was like, that's where you're going. And so, okay, let's go back and look at some of those things. Excellent, Steve. So I knew that on the expedition I was going to have internet. We had Starlink access. And so I made a website that I could interact with kids with. I interacted with them through Google Classroom, giving them feedback on all of their assignments. But for the trip specific stuff, I made a website where they could submit questions for me, either for me to answer or for me to find the answer. Part of our pre-teaching was looking at the other people on the expedition. I was one research team, there were 5 research teams. And so we went online and found bios about all of the other people who were there, and we looked at them. And so the kids knew who else was going to be there. I had this on the right hand, this flyer on green paper, because phytoplankton, all around the building in all different classrooms, and the kids could submit questions throughout the whole trip. Over the course of the entire expedition, I got questions from students, from staff, from community members, from people I did not know, and from custodians. Over the course of the expedition, I got 366 questions submitted to me. Number one question from middle school students: what are you eating? Number two question, where are you sleeping? Are you sleeping on a ship? We had a number of eighth graders who had done Battleship Cove and were asking if I was sleeping in bunks like they had seen and stayed in on Battleship Cove. After those questions, the questions got a lot more specific about the places we were going. Also on the website was a daily expedition log, and which was what I was doing during the day, but there was also a page that was just about the science that we were doing. And we used two main pieces of equipment that I talked about with the kids before we left and we did some research on. One of them is a plankton net. So this is me dragging a plankton net. Basically, it's a fine micron mesh net that collects water in a ball at the bottom, and it really condenses any of the debris, whether it's plankton or anything. And so we can take those water samples and look and see what kind of things were in the water. Sometimes we dragged it through ourselves. And next slide, Steve. Sometimes we attached it to boats. So these are pictures I took of our nets, different boats, depending on what islands we had permits at. Once we had these water samples, we brought back to the ship. And that was a planktoscope. This was the science lab we had on the ship. There was multiple labs. This is the lab that my crew was attached to. On the left there, we have a planktoscope. The water sample goes in the top. The purple circle there on the left, that's a computer that takes pictures. The yellow arrow is our light source, which caused lots of problems for us and was a great source of conversation with the kids about troubleshooting and things not going right. But it would take 3,000 pictures over the course of just a few minutes, just really massive snapshots. And it would store them on the computers that on the picture on the right there. That's our main researcher, Addie, and our engineer, Jet. Jet works with AI, and he coded software to be able to identify the species based on these pictures. And so the kids had a lot of questions for Jet. So the water samples we took through the nets, we put through here, of which all the kids now want a plankton net because they want to tow Souhegan River. We then looked up the prices of plankton nets. So that might be like a STEM project at some time. Next one. Each of these places that we sampled at, we got real data profiles. And so these are profiles that were created after the trip that I've shared with the kids, and Beth and I will be able to use for our, when we do our plant units next year. The other piece of equipment we used was called a Niskin bottle. The Niskin bottle was one that I mostly used because I've used one before. Basically, it's a bottle that props open on both ends. You can drop it down to a set depth, trigger it shut, and it will collect water. The benefit of this is called the vertical sampling. The benefit of this is that when you drag it up, it doesn't get contaminated by the other levels. And so this is us tying the knots, getting it set, using it. And then the next slide shows, I think, us. So this is when I was back on the ship. We would take the water from the vertical samples. We would run it through a water filter and we would collect it on this plastic membrane, and the membrane got stored with some chemicals to kill off viruses and preserve DNA. Addie was taking this back to his lab and running through a DNA gene sequencing machine, which is still something that's actively happening. And we're excited to get that data to use in our DNA and genetics unit next year. So all of this information was on the website, and I always put it at the top, today's data summary. They got pictures, they got an explanation. And what was really cool was to see the kids' questions as the expedition went along. In the beginning, it was about, the food and where are you sleeping and who's there. But as it went along, their questions had to do with the things that I was writing about. And so that was really cool to see, like, they're actually reading it. Part of that is Beth and Karen Urbanik, who is my sub. We're doing a lot of work on the back end back at AMS, and they were having dedicated days where they were working with kids going through the site, doing web quests through it, learning more about the equipment, and doing research based on what I was posting. Beth would pull together lesson plans last minute based on things that I had posted the night before. And so us working together was a really key part of the success of this experience. It was a really massive trip. It was really long. Not every day was a data collection day. And so one part of the website was just about the daily experiences that weren't science related. And so here's one day we were going by the Mariana Trench and the captain said, hey, it's really not that far. Let's go check it out. And so he put in the GPS coordinates of Challenger Deep, which is the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. And we just got in Zodiac and went swimming above the Mariana Trench. It was really a mind-blowing thing for me, just looking down and knowing what is below you. In the daily expedition log, I think that day I introduced the kids to the word gobsmacked, which means overwhelmed with shock, surprise, and wonder. I was gobsmacked to have that experience. Other things that we did that were non-science data related, but I still shared with the kids, was Jellyfish Lake, which is a really famous lake. It's cut off from the ocean for thousands and thousands of years, and the jellyfish have evolved to not have stingers. And so while this picture shows me and one jellyfish, looking down, there are hundreds and hundreds of these golden jellies, and they just do their jellyfish thing right into you. And it's really odd. They feel like wet gummy bears. They're surprisingly firm. Another thing that we did was we stopped at a lot of really tiny islands that were part of atolls. And the atoll is a volcano that has over time sunken down. And there's little bits of it still above the waterline, and each of those little bits are islands. These are tiny islands. 20 minutes you could walk side to side. These are islands that have no electricity. They've got pits in the ground for toilets. They have, the straw thatched roofs and platforms, and that's where they sleep. It's a really shocking experience to go and see that. And these girls on the left were supposed to be having a multiplication test that day. And when we got there, they said, we will give the tour. We want out. And so they gave me a tour around the island, and that was really cool to be able to talk with them. But at each of these islands, they have solar panels, which is just a really bizarre thing that they don't have any other tools or technology, but they have solar panels from China. China is donating solar panels to all of these islands. There's China aid stickers everywhere. And because they have solar panels, they've got this electricity, but what do they use it for? Cell phones. They don't use it for other things. So you've got this real odd mix of the way that they're living with cell phones. And so when I was talking to the girls who were giving me a tour, and I said, what things do you like to do? They like to listen to Taylor Swift. They like TikTok dances. They like to send messages to people outside of their land and their country. They paint, they draw, they hang with friends. I said, I know people like you. They sound like our kids. The solar panels are really interesting. Each island that we went to, everybody always gravitated towards the kids. I didn't go to the kids. I went to the teachers. And I always talked to the teachers about what teaching was like and what was school like and how has it changed for you, because here we have two completely different communities and yet we're still teaching 12-year-old kids. And so what is the same? And so this is a teacher that I was talking to, and she said that parents are on cell phones, that parents want their kids to do well, but that they're not putting in the time and energy to help their kids do well. And so what she's seeing changing over the years of her career is that in her schoolhouse, which has 10 kids, that there's always 1 or 2 kids that are behavior problems, but now what she sees is there's 7 or 8 kids that are behavior problems who are really struggling, making good choices and being members of their community. And what used to be about teaching content is now about just managing the day-to-day. And I said, yeah, we see that across the country, across the world. We're seeing shifts in behavior choices and the impact that's having. And so that was really interesting to be able to talk to her. Other things we saw, I'll go faster, but World War II relics, they were everywhere. We were in the South Pacific. We swam over shipwrecks and walked by tanks and swam over planes, which was a really odd mental space to be in, to swim over these things and just think about the history and the people that were a part of that. And they're all just still there. We passed the equator and the international dateline, which was a odd thing for the kids because I lived October 30th twice. And so that was a conversation that we had. When we crossed the equator, we had a dance party. The crew hooked up a hose from the ocean and we danced in the Pacific Ocean rain. The captain dressed like a pirate and his first mate dressed like Poseidon. It's a good time. One of the other researchers on the expedition was studying songs, and as we traveled through Federated States of Micronesia and Polynesia, they were studying how songs were changing. And so while I shared with the kids what my research was, I got to also share some of the things from the other researchers and see how those things changed. We also talked about at the equator, you get lots of really amazing cumulonimbus clouds because of the convection cells that merge there. So we would just see these massive storms from way off. And we got to talk about what convection is, which they focus more on in 8th grade, I think. But we've got lava lamps in class, so that runs by convection. And so we got to compare the atmosphere that we were seeing here with the lava lamps the kids were back at home playing with in class. But the most common questions I got, the most excited the kids got, were when I showed them dual point of view pictures. Because we were studying phytoplankton, it was a lot in the water. And so there was a lot of below and above pictures that I was able to take. I took this while we were data collecting one day. Hard to see, but right on the horizon there is our expedition ship. And so while all of this is happening back home, Miss Penny and Miss Urbanic were tracking us on maps outside my classroom. So not just my kids walking by, but anybody who walked by the building could see. I had bought this giant map on the right here, and I put flag pins for all of the islands we were stopping at. Miss Penny moved that note card every day, tracking as I went. I printed out a more close-up view on the left there of the actual route we were taking. She pulled pictures from the website and put them up on the wall for kids to see. And even today, kids walk by and I'll see them pointing and talking and, oh, remember this. And so that's a cool part that we have. The website is still active. You're welcome to go check it out. I'm no longer taking questions on it because there's a lot of questions there. But you can see we've got home, you can meet the team, just my research team. You can learn about plankton, you can read about the daily expedition log. That's more of the non-science stuff we did. And then the data collection is the science specific stuff we did. I really encourage you to check out the Ask Ms. Blah questions. They asked so many cool questions. I learned so much just by trying to figure out the answers to their questions. And it became such a thing because I'd be going up to like the National Geographic photographers and the ship captain and the engineers who were all Russian and Serbian. And I would go up and ask them and say, hey, my students have a question. And I kind of became known as having this tagline, my kids have a question. But it was really interesting. One of their questions for the captain was what happens if the engines blow up? And he's like, well, let me tell you. And he had this full nerd moment and I've got it all there. So it's really interesting the things that they came up with. And then of course I've got 3,000 more photos than what I've showed you tonight, but there's a link to expedition photos that you can check out as well. And I have all of this in each of my Google Classroom accounts so the kids can go in and check it out as well. But thank you so much for listening and approving.
Thank you, Kelly. And let me give my mea culpa. I mispronounced your last name, so I apologize.
Oh,
I should
yes,
have recognized that. Yes,
Blah.
so my mistake on that, but that is an amazing trip. Any
Yeah.
questions from anyone on the board about that? That is really cool.
Just to say how impressed I am, I mean, it's incredible, but what's most incredible and really just heartening to hear is the way that you and your team connected to make this a real experience for our students. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you to Miss Penny and to Mrs. Urbanic, because that takes a lot of coordination and preparation ahead of time. It's evident with your website and the way that you kept up with them. So just thank you for bringing this to life for them, because this is like a once in a lifetime, once in a million opportunity that you gave them and let them be a part of. So
Thank you. I find I've done other expeditions with National Geographic, and I find that when you go somewhere and you share it, it doesn't have to be somewhere extravagant like this. It can be any kind of place. But when the kids see pictures of you there in this place that they don't know, they say, well, I know Miss Blah. And if she could go there, then I could too. And I hear them talk about themselves in these scenarios a lot more when I show them a picture of myself. And so, yeah, glad to have had the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Terry?
Okay, I love everything about this. And I get to do a lot of outside work. What people don't realize is that these meetings are important, but we do a lot of work outside of these meetings. And this was one time where I really enjoyed doing my homework by checking out your website ahead of time and reading through all of those questions. And I saw the question about Moana, like, oh, like that Moana and now it makes total sense to me. And so I loved that you broke out the questions into kind of, I talked to this person, I talked to that. You really were able to guide us through. So I felt like I learned so much, but then coupling that with what you were doing day to day and with your co-teacher, oh my goodness, what an amazing resource for our kids. And I think that travel is the number one way that you both understand what's beyond you, but then realize how much we all have in common. And hearing that their parents are on their cell phones too, and the kids are having behavioral makes it feel like, okay, this is a challenge that we could all try to work on together because we do have things in common. And I guess that's my biggest question now that you've been on a few of these, and I'm thrilled that you had the precursor, so you were able to really prepare and make the most of that interaction. And thank you for the extra work that took. What's your next place you want to go?
I'm going to Switzerland this summer I go backpacking every summer, and so we're doing the Mont Blanc Trail. I have some friends who are teachers across the world, and every summer we meet up in another country. Last summer we did, Vancouver, and we've done Peru and Scotland, and we're going to Switzerland.
I want to be one of your buddies, man. That sounds amazing. Can't wait to hear about the next one.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Thank you, Kelly. This is really cool. And when we send out our recap after the meeting, I'll make sure that we include your links in there as well. So that if you're in that recap, folks can go to the website and check out the photos and check out the summaries and the recaps, which is the whole website as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. So now that none of us have been to the South Pacific, we can get on to regular business.
No, you're good to go. You're dismissed.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the consent agenda tonight. As we go to the consent agenda, we do want to recognize about $6,400 in unanticipated revenue from the Amherst PTA with a laundry list of items that they're supporting in schools and various departments and projects. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions on the consent agenda that the board might have? Any other items they want to bring up on those? Seeing none, I will take a motion to pass the consent agenda as presented tonight.
I'll make the motion.
A motion from Shannon. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
I have one from Tim. Seeing no further discussion, we'll have to do a roll call vote, starting with Terry.
Beam, yes.
White, yes.
Is that a yes, Jason? All we heard is white.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, White, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Subversion.
Gascoigne, yes.
And Gothier, yes. So we check that one off as a 5-0 vote. Next item on the agenda is something we reviewed and we started at our last meeting in January after the public hearing, talking about communications pieces and communications efforts. So we're a little less than 3 weeks away from voting day now. I know we've been out and about quite a bit in the community, so just wanted to give a recap on some of that. Tim and I were at a Souhegan basketball game a few weeks ago. We were at the Amherst PTA board last night, their annual, for lack of a better term, budget meeting, presenting to the PTA members. Anybody else like to share some of the places that we've been and then some of the things that we have coming up next? Tim?
Sure. So I presented to the Amherst Conservation Commission. They were extremely grateful. They said it was the first time anyone from the Amherst School Board had ever been to the Amherst Conservation Commission meeting, which isn't surprising. But at the same time, they actually had a lot of stuff to share that I think would actually, we just had a great presentation about bringing the real world into the classroom. They have pretty big concerns actually about invasive species. As somebody who fought those daily at my last house, that's actually a pretty big pressing issue, both from a plant and wildlife perspective here. And so they did have some suggestions for us. Should the bond be approved for the Wilkins property, there are some pretty extensive invasive species out towards the back of the property. They said that would be a challenge to deal with. They also wanted to suggest that we work with them on increasing access to the Great Meadow directly across the street from the school, improving access, better crossing potentially, maybe the sidewalk, because of the potential of making that accessible to the kids and the community as a way to learn more about that particular resource. So they were very appreciative. They gave us those comments in writing, so we do have those.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, one of the things I responded to Jared on, who had sent that over, was I think that those are items, for the most part, at least 2 of them, I think, that we can talk about as a board after we get through the election. We can make that a spring item, because I don't foresee any reason why we can't start dealing with invasive species now in terms of remediation. I know that over at the field by Clark School, there are some trees with some pretty aggressive poison ivy on it. So I think that those are all items that's one of our properties that we'll talk about later. Those are places where we can start to, with the assistance of the town, really trying to fight some of that. I think that can happen regardless. I think the other middle item was just making sure that the construction is within the wetlands buffers. I think was their other point, which we already know that it is. And I think access to the Great Meadow, whether we have a new building or not, we can still work on improving that access, whether it's just simply crosswalks or whether it's utilization of that. I think things that we can talk about between now and summertime for next year going forward. So, Kathleen, we'll certainly rely on your expertise for some of that and get your input on that as well. But I think those are items that we can look at regardless of what happens on March 12th. Shannon, anything to provide on that? Any other, we have been in quite a few places. We've talked with a few committees. We've shared some flyers. We have a good setup at the library as well.
Yep. So we have a great setup at the library, have posted a couple of info tables during infant story time, toddler story time. There was an AARP afternoon offering for older folks in town. So Christine Grayson from Building and Grounds and also PTA, she attended that one. Got a good number of folks coming up to with questions there. Obviously, was in the PTA meeting with you last night. Yeah, and then I know that the PTA, as part of this, is kind of leads into my committee update, but I'll give that now on PTA. They've also been hosting a number of events as well, in partnership with the school. So I don't know, Thomas, if you're okay with it or if it's appropriate or not, but if Dr. Murphy could, I know that you've done a few copies. As well to get folks.
Sure.
Is it okay? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we did a coffee about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago now. And it was a small turnout, but a good turnout, some community members, some parents right after drop off. We are hosting another coffee Friday, March 8th. We're also hosting a brunch and learn, thinking to try to grab some individuals in the community who might have that like lunch hour off that want to come into the building while students are there that same week on Wednesday, March 6th. And then on Saturday, March 9th, the building will be open for the tours. You'll see in the principal's report too, we also have a couple of events going on in the school that are part of our goal around strengthening partnerships. So we hosted an event inviting senior members of our community, which was well attended. PTA provided some lunch, and during that session, we were able to offer the opportunity for those residents to ask questions about the building project, and if you elected to go on a tour too.
Thank you. Anything else, Shannon?
Well, I know Terry also has scheduled a couple.
Yeah, I was gonna go to
coming,
Terry
so,
next after.
Yeah.
Terry, go ahead.
All right, so I got to unmute. So yeah, for one, I want to just join in thanking the PTA for all of their incredible support. They have been, they're always fantastic partners to us, but I think that this year especially, they've just been really creative in lots of different ways. And I know that they voted to help us get the word out and do some advertising with us with lawn signs and other things. So we as a board do not provide those, but if anybody is interested in getting one, they can reach out to the PTA to be able to show their support for our warrant articles. And I know that Vicki Leckness is hosting an upcoming evening with some of the community members in the Atherton neighborhood, and I'm looking forward to attending that. We're going to kindergarten info night, and one of my favorite moments has been when I got a text from my daughter who just moved in across the street from the high school, and she says, "I think I just met somebody you serve with." And I said, "Describe her." And so she had gone with her toddler son to the library, and I met Shannon and got to hear from someone besides me about why she needs to vote for the school now that she can vote in Amherst. I'm like, you have no excuse. You live across from the high school. You had better be there. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun to get back out and get to interact directly with the community more than we sometimes get to. And I just wanted to especially thank you for hosting that afternoon that looked so wonderful, where we had been trying to bring more of our citizens into the schools before COVID. And now that we're starting to see that again, I was really thrilled to see the pictures and hear from some of the people that were at that afternoon. And I recognized quite a few faces of people who've been engaged with our schools previously. And I'm so happy to see them back in, and some new people really getting to not just see the building, but see it alive with students. and interact with them and get to meet our teachers and see the amazing work they do. So thank you so much. I know that it's hard to pull those extra activities together, but I think they're so worthwhile. And I was really excited to see that one.
Thank you, Terry. I'll also be meeting with, I just drew a blank on what I was going to say, Peter Lyon, the selectman chair. He and I are going to be meeting in the next week or so as well. We caught up last night at the PTA meeting, so he and I will be meeting just more of a high level conversation, but certainly talking about this. And we talked with Mike after as well, but getting together selectmen from both towns, Mount Vernon board, the SAU board, our board, obviously, or I should say Souhegan board, and just having a wider ranging conversation about the district as a whole, and the relationship with the town. So working on that for a summertime project potentially, but I will be meeting with Peter here in the next couple of weeks, before election day to just chat with him, so.
I love that. That's
Yep.
great.
Again, so we'll have some more social media posts, really pushing out the flyer, that we have, that Tim put together, finding new ways to share that. So again, if you have other ways to be able to share that, that would be great. If it's possible, Kathleen, if we can start putting that, we'll share the flyer with you, but if we can include that in person as well in the weekly emails to parents, that would be beneficial. It'd be great to have that. I know that those get a lot of traffic. And then you might have mentioned it as well, Shannon, the PTA does have signs available for folks that want to get those. They have those available. They can, order, for lack of a better term. You might have mentioned it, but I just wanted to reiterate it as I was going through my notes.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I actually think it was Terry who mentioned it, but I've seen that they've been, I think they shared it out in a membership email, and it's also, there's a link to order on their Facebook page.
Okay.
And you had some feedback.
Well, so I had
as well.
there was a question with regard to, so one of the big issues in this, in general, in the United States, is voter turnout, right? And so, even in the heated presidential primary that you saw this time, voter turnout was about 58%. Meaning there's, 42% of the people that could have voted that didn't, right? And the turnout for the last election was even lower than that. I think the one that didn't have really anything other than local elections on it. And one of the things that I think is important for people to know is that there's several reasons you can vote absentee. Ironically, I might have to be one of them. Unless there's a government shutdown, I'll be in North Carolina on election day. So even I have to vote absentee. But I think it's important for people that think it's so hard to get there. I have kids I have to deal with. I have work I can't miss. There's a variety of reasons that you're allowed to vote absentee in New Hampshire. I would strongly encourage people to do that. There was a suggestion, I wasn't even thinking of including the one pager in the newsletter. I'm glad you said that. But actually make a plan to vote is one of those concepts.
Like providing.
A link to how to vote absentee, or
Basic voting information. I
You
know
know,
the supervisors have a
matters too.
checklist to put together a little document on that. Yeah.
And with that, you mentioned the absentee. I actually got I got a postcard in the mail today talking about absentee balloting that you can have to kind of request ballot. So it's coincidental timing that came in the mail today to my house. So, anything from Mike or Steve or anything administration wise in this? Great.
Now, to your point, we have some voter information that we were gonna be working with the town to get out to parents.
And then there's a podcast coming up as well that you guys have done, and I'm totally drawing blank on the content of this, but it just goes around not necessarily building or voting, but really overall school philosophy and what we're trying to work on mission wise here as well.
Yeah, no, there's gonna be a podcast coming out early March. And as we continue our communication efforts about the direction of SAU and Amherst School District. And what we want the experience to be like for students and families.
Okay. Great. Anything else from anybody on this before we move along to the next agenda item? Okay, we will move on now to the New Hampshire Council on the Arts grants. Mike, I think this is something that you can speak to as well.
Yeah, so, we have, Clark was applied as in the board notes for a residence grant to bring in, different, artists and grants, and in the spring, Kathleen reminded me, we have, Marek Bennett coming in, right?
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about what that's gonna
Absolutely.
look like?
Yeah, so Jess Anderson applied for this grant over the summer. And we will have Merrick Bennett join us, focusing with second graders. So each second grade class will get at least 3 hours, probably a little bit more of time to work directly with him on developing a comic book. So every student will become a comic book author during this experience. It'll happen throughout the month of April. All of our other students at Wilkins in grades 1, 3, and 4 will also get a little bit of like comic book chat with Merrick, and then we'll have a culminating comic book convention at school, where during the school day, it'll be a little bit of an assembly where he will do some guest writing, illustrating, and then in the evening invite families to come in for students to share their work as authors. There's also an opportunity that he provides our teachers with professional development one afternoon of his time of how you can engage young writers through the lens of comic books. So we're very excited for this offering. Jess has been working hard with the grade 2 teachers to build a schedule, kind of being flexible around some of the early release changes in April, but yeah, she just sent me one today, and it looks pretty good and ready to go. So excited to welcome a new residency. And this has been part of our work with PTA and the community to try to offer one of these types of experiences for each grade level at Wilkins over time.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we do have to have a motion tonight to be able to accept the resolution, to be able to accept this grant. So the resolution would read like this, that Michael Berry, Superintendent of Schools, is duly authorized to enter into contracts or agreements on behalf of Amherst School Board with the state of New Hampshire, acting by and through the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, New Hampshire State Council on the Arts, and is further authorized to execute any documents on behalf of this municipality which may be in his judgment desirable or necessary to effect the purpose of this resolution. So this relates directly to this grant with the New Hampshire Council on the Arts. So can I get a motion in that manner?
I will make that motion.
Thank you, Shannon. Danae, do you have that? It's in the board notes as well, the actual verbiage of it, so you don't have to take it from what I just said.
I'll
Second
second.
is Tim as a second. Any further discussion on this piece? Seeing none, I will call a roll call vote starting with Terry. Oh, I'm sorry, Terry, I didn't see your hand up there, blended in with the screen, sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, it does kind of, doesn't it? I just wanted to let Kathleen know that this year, Free Comic Book Day is a national thing, is on May 4th. So that may be a great tie-in to, if the kids get excited about it, you can kind of get them excited to go to that. And most of the libraries, I know like Merrimack Library usually has free ones. Our library, a lot of the smaller comic book shops in the surrounding areas have different activities going on. And that may be a really great tie-in with this.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, now seeing no further comment, Terry, can you start us off on the vote, please?
Beam, yes.
Jason?
White, yes.
Burge, yes?
White, yes.
Yep, we got you, Jason, thank you. And Gothier, yes, as well, so 5-0 today, on that vote as well. Moving on to the next item, we have our reports that have been submitted tonight. We do have our principals, Kristen Gothier from AMS and Dr. Kathleen Murphy from Clark Wilkins, so I will open it up to the board. Reports tonight are the principals' reports from the two of them, as well as facilities and treasurer reports for the month of January. So with our principals here, I will open it up for questions from the board, and I know Terry has her hand raised already, so we will start with you.
Sorry. So always a lot going on. It's a busy time of year. Before anything, I just want to say I was so sorry to hear of the passing of Dan Farina. He was an amazing individual and such an addition to our school. And I know that that has been a very hard thing over at the middle school. And I just wondered how the staff is doing, how the kids are doing, if there's an update, and also express our condolences as a board.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it. I think, as good as we can be, certainly children are resilient. Unfortunately, this is the second year our staff have had a loss of a fellow staff member. Last year we dealt with the loss of Lindsay Toomey, which was difficult for many people. And so, I'm hoping that this is not a trend, certainly. It was something that was, really hit home for kids this year because we had some kids who had some long-term relationships with Dan, that they knew him before he left to go to Keene. and had come back. So our 8th grade class was really close with him. And then he had really started building some close relationships with 5th and 6th graders. He had lunch groups and had done some of the counseling services for that group as well. So I am amazed at how resilient kids are. I also am really appreciative of my SEL team, my other counselors and social workers who really picked up to help support in his loss since he's been gone. So it's definitely a hole that we feel. And, you know, much like grief is, some days we feel it more than others, for sure. We miss him a lot, but I think as, you know, many of us have been thinking along the way, we just continue to try to do what Dan would do and come to work with a smile on our faces and treat kids the way Dan would treat them. And, you know, that's the best we can do is sort of live his legacy. But thank you for checking. Appreciate it.
No, it's definitely, it's been on my mind, and I'm glad to hear that everybody is really, and I'm not surprised at all to hear that everybody's banding together and supporting each other and supporting the kids. And I don't think there's anything we really can do, but our thoughts are with you on that one. On a happier note, I see there was just a semi-formal. I saw an awful lot of Facebook posts and lots of girls in cute dresses and sneakers. I wish that had been a trend when I was that age. We didn't get anything that
A lot of
comfortable.
smarts. Yes. A lot of blisters in our day.
And
Yeah, it was a good time.
the grocery games, I'm happy to see those back and see those going strong. Those are one of the really cool things that I think brings it home for kids, like starts to tie things together for them, right? Like seeing some of the skills they're learning and some of those soft skills we want them to have. Like, how do you plan a healthy diet? How do you take care of yourself? How do you make your money stretch before, you know, college is the first time some of them have ever had to feed themselves and think about any of that. So I think I've always really liked this particular program that we've gone. Was there anything different about it, or is it pretty much the same as it's been in years past and continues to be a favorite?
Yeah, I'd say pretty much the same. I think a huge shout out, because obviously it's a weekend activity. And it's something kids look forward to. And so they kind of go out of their way to, you know, be somewhere on a weekend and take the time out of their lives. And Holly does as well, certainly. That's something she enjoys. And I would say, Holly Bordenberg also, you know, everything she does, whether it be venture adventure, when the kids are designing their own businesses, in 8th grade, or even grocery games, she's always looking for how we can give back to the community. So she designs these things with that charitable mindset. So I appreciate that she's helping students learn that piece as well, which she did with grocery games. So I thank her for that and instilling that in our students as well.
And I swear, last one for AMS, and then I'll let someone else take the floor. I noticed a familiar face in the spelling bee winners. I wanted to congratulate our own chair for, I believe that is one of your daughters who had a.
Yes, it's one of my daughters. Yeah, she never told us it was even happening and came over and said, I got second place. I didn't remember what word she had. Not a big deal. So thank you, Terry, for recognizing that.
That's good.
All right, someone else could take a turn.
Anybody else? Tim, go ahead.
Sure. So one of the other events I went to is I stood out in front for STEM night at Wilkins. So I've always enjoyed those nights. I think the best part of that to me was that the parents were there too, because it wasn't just in school and it was that after hours stuff, which puts all of that stuff in the hands of not just the kids, but of the parents, right? So that was great to see. And the highlight of that night for me was the kids who saw the posters saying, and this is what to their parents, and this is what our new school is going to be. Smile and excitement on the kids' faces who saw what their school could be was amazing. But to focus on this STEM night that was good stuff. So I don't think that was also with the PTA.
Yes.
So thank you again to them for hosting that type of event. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was the first time we brought that back in a little while. They had a great chair. Tabitha Moriarty chaired it for the PTA this year and did a lot of organizing behind the scenes, and it was great to get the community out for that evening.
A lot of student-led activities as well. One of the Amherst Girl Scout troops was involved, and just to see those kids that are in middle school just take a big leadership role, even over with kids that are only a few years younger than them was pretty interesting to see and pretty, because you don't think of it when you have kids that are in that age, they're not exactly like that all the time, but to see them have that capability was nice to see. Jason?
Yeah, so I have a question, but Dr. Murphy, if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. It's kind of an in the weeds question about your grade team levels and meeting with interventionists. So it can just be a kudos, but if you are willing to answer a question, I would love that too. You know, it mentions that you're looking at benchmark data, and I love that we're using data to make instructional decisions. That's what we've been hearing for so long, and now we're seeing some of that work. We're going to be looking at data later on in this meeting, but could you answer when we say we're looking at benchmark data, like what specific data is that? We're looking at SAS, we're looking at NEWA, we're looking at local, we're looking at some combination thereof. Again, I know that's kind of an in the weeds question, but just excited about the fact that that's the direction.
Jason, I'm happy to answer that. We're looking at a lot of different types of data and it varies by grade level. I would say too, when we're looking at kids in kindergarten through second grade, sometimes we're focusing more on Ames web data that's specific probes looking at skills that we're focusing on in the classroom and also in intervention time for students to decode, crack the code, develop some of those phonological awareness skills that are necessary for them to become fluent readers. Older students were relying more on oral reading fluency versus some of those skills-based assessments that are part of an Ames web type of suite. In addition to Ames web, we're looking at our NEWA data, which is much bigger picture, especially for students in the K2 setting, which has some focus of foundational skills, but also looks at, listening comprehension through the lens of informational text and fiction text. In addition to those more formalized assessments, teachers are conducting running records with students, kind of on a regular basis to check in on our students applying the skills for those specific phonics patterns in controlled text or in non-controlled text, and taking all this information into consideration to develop plans. Our literacy team is really committed to working directly with teachers. So we're checking in regularly to build what we call tier 1 plans, which are plans of actions that teachers implement in the classroom based off of the guidance from the data and discussions with the reading specialist. And then we have students who have tier 2 and tier 3 plans. And those plans will be a combination of push-in or pull-out services to be more focused on specific needs. And then teachers are helping to support those needs in the classroom, of course, as well. But the outside of the classroom time, we're also monitoring with other data and assessment to keep track of a child's individual growth. And then you may have noticed we're really focusing this year on our tier 2, so intervention services and special educators working together to make sure that we have the best groups for students. So looking at group size and frequency and duration of services, and if a child is not making an expected rate of progress, being flexible and making changes more quickly. So we'll have another one of those check-in meetings actually tomorrow afternoon. So we're feeling I'm feeling very proud as the principal of this school with a group of educators who are just dedicated to using the data to help tell the story of a student, but also to think about everything and not just one data point when building a plan for a child.
Great. All right, any other questions for the principals tonight on the reports that we have seen? Okay, seeing none, we will move on.
Wait.
Tonight. We had a resignation to review as a board. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask about the Northeast Passage of activity. And can you remind us a little bit about that particular one over at Wilkins?
Sure. So Northeast Passage is a program that's was connected or still is connected with the University of New Hampshire. Mr. Holt, our PE teacher, has brought it in for the last several years through grant support from the PTA. It's now part of the PTA's ongoing budget to help support programming at Clark Wilkins. It's a similarity awareness program. So throughout the week, all students during PE time will use wheelchairs and learn about how many different individuals use wheelchairs on a regular basis. for mobility purposes, and then also how we can use them for sport. It helps students learn all about similarities that they have with individuals that they may have thought they have differences from. So each class at Wilkins gets to participate in that, and it's an ongoing program, and we're so pleased and thankful for Mr. Holtz for bringing this to our school community as he finds ways to, just help students recognize that, even amongst differences, there's so much that is the same.
No, thank you. I couldn't remember whether it was just a particular grade or if all of the kids got to experience it. So I'm happy to hear it's everyone. I think it's another one of those things that just demystifying, right? Understanding and thinking about things you wouldn't otherwise think about because it doesn't affect you directly. It's such a really important part of our social learning and just as humans. And so I love that program and I'm so glad we do it. And then Invention Convention, how was the turnout this year? Unfortunately, we were double booked. We had an SAU board meeting on Monday and I was heartbroken because it's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, we had 57 inventors on Monday evening. The multipurpose room was filled with students and parents, and energy and enthusiasm over all sorts of inventions that kids created and shared. It was a wonderful evening. It was Ms. Polio's in her final year with us and her final year as chair of the invention convention work. So we had a number of winners that are headed towards the next round. So we'll see how they fare, and perhaps later this spring, we may be able to have some of those inventors come and spend some time with you guys and share their inventions as well as we've had in the past.
We had somebody set the bar pretty high last year, Kathleen. They made it to the nationals, so
very
I don't know
high.
if they should state local winners in any sort of presentations.
Yeah, they're all winners.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Kathleen or Kristen?
I have one actually for Kristen, and I appreciate the reports, on the communicating with parents and engaging families. Is there anything from AMS to share on that front? Like, I know at Clark Wilkins are doing a lot of like book clubs and things like that, but I know it's different when the kids get a little bit older. So like, how was your night with the grading reporting in terms of parents?
Sure, I believe we had 19 or 20, so we had some double, parents in one Zoom. I felt like that was a decent turnout. I wish we had more, for sure. I also obviously have had a few other parents who just talked with me over the phone or met with me in person who didn't make it onto the Zoom, and that's fine too. And so that's helpful. I think once we have some more structures around what we plan to do for next year, we're going to invite people to come back into the Zoom and be able to, show them what we plan to go forward with and get some feedback. So I think that's a big piece. One of the things we're working on next year, and there's a lot of things, and I think that's definitely a struggle for me, is wanting to do all the things at once. But one of the things I think we want to work on school-wide, one of my pieces is how we communicate with families and the best way to do that and what's going to work well for families as well, because what we might perceive works well for families might not work well for families. And so it's getting at what is going to work well. We did a small survey last year. We got about 70 responses. And I got some information from that. I got a lot of good grading and reporting information from that, which drove some of the work we're doing this year. But that is one piece of it. So figuring out what's happening in the classroom and kind of setting those expectations with our staff in terms of, how often parents and families should be communicated about what's happening whole class or individual, that type of thing. Families did also voice that they wanted, opportunities for more conferences. Obviously, that's a bigger conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because there's contract implications there. But they do want to talk to teachers more often. So I feel like that's good.
Encouraging.
It is encouraging.
Yeah.
And they appreciate that. So we're working on it. I will say that what you're talking about is going to be definitely addressed in our grading and reporting work. What I would like to also get at is some of the the sort of public service things that we can get at is, last year we did internet safety night, nobody came. So I know families are busy, and so it's figuring out what is the right vehicle, what are the right topics. For me, that was super interesting, super scary, and you know, I feel like everybody, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
had literally the investigators from the state who, you know, do these investigations and they know all the tricks and everything. And I thought it was fascinating and I wanted everybody to hear about it. So something like that, I think is really helpful, but not everybody has the time. So it's figuring out how to, you know, what modality and what topics are gonna work best for families. So we're working on it, I would say
Yeah, no,
for sure.
great.
It's a work in
I
progress.
appreciate the update. I can't overemphasize enough how excited I am for the work that you're doing with the grading reporting.
Yeah, thank you.
I think providing families with that clear picture is gonna, you know, hopefully will help a lot with some of the things to support the work that everyone's doing.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, moving on tonight, I started to mention it earlier, we had a resignation to review tonight, but the board does have further questions, so instead of doing that in a public session, we're gonna do that in the non-public at the end of the meeting tonight. And then we'll take our vote on that resignation to approve or to table it after that part of the meeting, so that was going to be moved down to the end of the agenda tonight. So this will move us over to subcommittee reports. Shannon has already provided on the PTA, Tim has provided on Conservation Committee. Anybody else have any reports of note that they would like to share updates on tonight?
So policy committee wise, the recent meetings have been, I would describe as robust. Far more than your average policy meeting, which is often looking at what you get for the fall or the spring update from the NHSBA and decide if yours are close enough or not. They've actually been very, very good, very deep on a lot of stuff. As a result of that, we only have a couple, right, that we actually get to move forward, but the conversation and the development, well, the resulting policies because of that depth of discussion are far better products than they otherwise would have been. So it's been really good. We're sorry to lose, I'm gonna get her name wrong. I want to say Sarah.
Sarah Lawrence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Horrible name, so I apologize. But we're sorry to see her go. But yeah, the committee with some really great discussions the past couple of meetings.
And we do have
We do have
policy
something.
conversations to have later on tonight on a couple of specific ones, and then the overall packet, your latest round of work as well, that'll be coming up on the agenda.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Tim for his, being my partner on that committee. I was not able to attend our last meeting and had no concerns about that fact, knowing that Tim would be there to represent us as a board and share all of that back with us. It was the last meeting for the policy committee for this season, so, we won't be going into policy again until after the election and
Sure.
reorganization.
And that's why you have for those of you that were at the SAU meeting, that's why that package came there. It was because if we don't move on some of these, which are fairly high priority ones, it's 4 months out until we get to them, so.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you, Tim. Gary?
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask for an assist on this one. I wasn't able to attend RSEC. There's no remote option, and I was out ill. And I know that I believe Mr. Barry attended that one, and I wondered if he had any updates from it.
Yeah, the crux of the RSEC meeting, the final budget was approved by
Oh,
the
good.
board. And it sounds like they put a good bit of effort into being as thoughtful as they can about their development of their budget. And so that was kind of the highlight of that meeting and the main purpose. And then there was some conversation in non-public that I can catch you up with a little bit, and you know, about some topics that are relevant that we're all dealing with. So that was the RSEC.
Okay, no, thank you. And I know that wellness, we've had a couple of scheduling challenges, but that we have started a poll and kind of what people would like to see, what they'd like to know more about. And I was really excited to see the wellness challenge going on at Clark Wilkins, actually. That you've got 80 people participating, and I feel like that's something that Steve, we ought to jump on and see what's working right there, so maybe we can roll it out to some of the other schools.
Thank you. Good. Thank you, Terry. Any other updates? Okay, so we will now move on to our next agenda item with Ms. Landworld regarding SAS data. She was able to, I don't say she was able to disaggregate this by town, one of the requests of the board. So I will turn it over to you, Christine, to go through the presentation once Steve is ready with it.
So the top chart that you see is what you were presented with previously when we did our overall assessment presentation. And I always like to color code just so you can follow cohorts through. What I did, so you've seen the top part already, and we've already discussed that fairly deeply. What I provided for you was the breakdown by town. So I broke out Amherst only residents from all AMS students. And I also provided the state data there just for a comparison point that I think can sometimes be helpful just to get a sense. As we know, across the state, scores can fluctuate significantly by grade level, and we do see typically a decline in the middle school years versus the elementary years across the state. So that's a pretty typical trend each year overall. In looking at this, one of the big questions was, is there a big difference between the Amherst cohort and the Mount Vernon cohort related to performance? And just a concern possibly that, one could be impacting overall scores and they are mixed together. So it's hard for us to really see that. And what we're seeing is that the Amherst only students, there's not, neither in the math nor in the English language arts, a significant difference. Certainly a little bit of a fluctuation and at some grade levels and content areas between the Amherst only scores and the all AMS scores. And again, that's because your Amherst cohort is so large, so you're not going to typically see a huge difference. Where we're seeing the most difference really is in 7th grade English language arts. All of AMS was at 73% proficient, but Amherst only was 77% proficient. So that Mount Vernon cohort did have an impact at that point. We've shared this information with we've shared Mount Vernon only results with the Mount Vernon board, and we're having some conversations with them around their assessment results as well, and really trying to dig in just when there are some fluctuations and changes in performance. Is that due to true academic either improvements or declines, or is that really true attributed to something else, a transition piece? Is it a change in testing environment from what they're used to, and so forth? So as far as the Amherst boards, there's not a significant difference between the results you're seeing when you're looking at all AMS students and the Amherst only students, but certainly in places, the Mount Vernon results are having a small impact on the AMS scores.
I have a question. When you mentioned testing environments impacting, so
You want me to talk more
can you
about that?
talk through how, like, if that's identified, or maybe we think that's an issue with the student?
Yeah.
Cases of, what are the steps?
Yeah, so there's a few things. In Mount Vernon, they have very small class sizes compared to AMS. So when they go, we're trying to figure out how much might be external factors impacting students' assessment results. So we're looking at every single piece, and Steve and I have been working together on this piece. So we look at the Mount Vernon students, they're with their homeroom teacher, and 14, 15 students in a class, sometimes even smaller if there are some students that are removed from that regular homeroom class to be in a separate setting. You might have as small as 10 or 11 students in that classroom taking New Hampshire SAS test. It's a very different environment when they go to AMS. They're probably in a class of at least 20 students taking the New Hampshire SAS assessment. And the other impact, which this impacts all of our students as they transition from 6th grade to 7th grade, you move from a STEM humanities model to a 4 teacher team model. And how that impacts specifically, especially in 7th and 8th grade, is students are not always taking the test with their math teacher for the math assessment. They might be taking it with their social studies teacher, and they may be taking it with their science teacher. How much does that affect student engagement and so forth? We also have had some conversations around the test window at Mount Vernon, because they're one-to-one for computers up at Mount Vernon, and they have a smaller percent of the school has to take New Hampshire SAS. K-2 doesn't take it. Similar, we have these conversations at Clark Wilkins. Kathleen only has 2 grade levels testing ever. In Mount Vernon, they have 3 through 6 testing, but K-2 is not. So that provides flexibility with that test window and the ability to pull students more flexibly for assessment. At AMS, every single student is testing and we're not one-to-one, which makes that a challenge. We've also traditionally at AMS taken the assessment in all 1 week. We are not doing that this year for a few reasons, but I don't know how much test fatigue might be impacting students in a very different kind of environment than they've taken before. Now, no matter what, our 7th and 8th grade students might be, all of them equally impacted by not taking it with their math teacher.
Right.
Because we know our 6th grade students have that same experience in the STEM humanities model, and 7th grade, that's a pretty big switch and change.
Right, and that, yeah, I think that's kind of what I was getting at a little bit too. And so I don't know if you can speak to this or not. This is maybe going way down the rabbit hole and you can stop me, but I'm curious if you've noticed over time a shift, or not a shift, but maybe more of a need to figure out ways to pull kids in small groups. Like in the way that we administer the test, how has it changed with like just student population, size, needs, things like that, computer access, like, does that question
The biggest challenge at AMS relate for New Hampshire SAS, and I'm not advocating for or against instructionally in general, but for the New Hampshire SAS assessment in general, it is a big challenge to not be one-to-one. Now, again, that assessment is essentially a week if you squish it all together. So any decisions we're making should be, instructionally.
Yeah, no, I understand, yeah, no, I'm not.
But that makes it a significant challenge for Kristen because, and the other challenge too, I'll mention is that all of the other schools are testing at the same time. So Kristen can't borrow laptops from another school and say, hey, now we're set and we have one-to-one. So it does make it a huge
Right, I
challenge.
guess what I'm getting at is, are the logistics of how we're administering the test impacting the outcome?
Reasons for it.
So I can speak,
And so do we need to have,
I can speak to all this.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of hearsay and speculation on why we're not performing. At the bottom line is, in my opinion, in SU 39 from Sauhegan to MV to Amherst, without offending anyone, there needs, in my professional opinion, needs to be an increased value on standardized testing. There just has not been historically a value on it. And if people don't want to agree with that, they can have that opinion. But in my opinion, since arrival in 2020, the value of creating the environment, getting the materials, to aligning curriculum, to setting the expectations, to communicating out with families, to creating the testing window, all that has to be revisited because it is not a one thing. It's not a one school thing. It is a cultural thing that's been historically approached that way. And so to kind of assess and analyze that just takes a little bit of kind of reflection, looking at the practices, looking at the 3 districts, looking at the resources, looking at the approach. Because I know people that I've talked to in Amherst, they want to know more on why, the results are the results. And at the end of the time, you have SAS, we talk a little bit about NEWA, we talk about Ames Web, we talk about different data points. And for us, what I'm looking forward to is in July, as we kind of look at, grade 4 and grade 8, looking at the culmination of certain experiences in different places, and then having some thoughts on how we're going to move forward in the 24-25 school year based on the results of the spring data here in the, where we're at. And, I'd like to remind people as we talk about data, there's data for growth, right? That if you're not an educator, it's very difficult to consume and understand. And that's when you get into like Ames Web and Dibble and NEWA and local stuff that our teachers are doing. When we talk about SAS, that's a little more easily consumable for us and it's easily explained. And so that's more for like effectiveness And so we're gonna continue the conversation to, work as a school district and schools to do that. But we're also gonna continue the conversation and work with our students and their families about this. And at the end of the day, I think what we all can agree on is that we can change, the process and the approach and the value system. And then we'll see what that's in control. And then see once we make those changes, see where we're at. And then that will help us continue to continue to focus on this. But for me, I look at this type of data and I say, we want to remain pretty even about it. Because at the end of the day, we got students who take it and we want them to do well and we want them to evaluate. But if the school is not structured to promote that type of value and approach, that can affect students too. And so I just want to be real honest about it. It's not a one answer question.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. And like I said, when I started out, I wasn't trying to go down a rabbit hole. And I'm with you on your, data's data and, it's what it is. It's a snapshot in a day of time and we'll use it to inform. My question was more driving at if there's a way that we can support those structures, to elevate it to your point.
Trying to minimize the influence of those for us to be able to use the data as a closer to what we feel is true academic performance of our students. And one thing, Steve and I tried to do when we prepared the report on New Hampshire SAS, we actually looked at one of our grade levels that was surprising for us. And we actually, in triangulating data, so using multiple data points to see if there is one test that students may not be performing as well on because there's an impact, because there's some external factors impacting them. We looked actually at our local assessment data for last year's 5th grade in comparison to the New Hampshire SAS, and we saw a difference with that. So, and I didn't do that for every grade level. That was 5th grade because we did that deeper dive, which we shared with you previously. So as we work moving forward on New Hampshire SAS, the administration is split up into really, probably more like 2 chunks of time. Students are required to take the writing in March, and then the math and the ELA will be in May. And just looking at that alone, I think is going to have a really positive impact for our students, just separating. It's not all in 1 week, but again, it will be interesting to see those results. And it's hard to tease out the influence of all these pieces. I think, again, it's, getting back to triangulating those data points and then really looking at it. And a lot of what I wanted to focus on this is the work that we're doing right now. So we are currently piloting standards aligned materials in 6th or 8th grade math. And Kristen and I just met yesterday with our 6th or 8th grade math department to talk about how are things going, what are you seeing with your students, are there any changes? And teachers are overall pretty excited about what they're seeing so far. Our 6th grade teachers were talking about the change in perseverance with their students and tackling challenging problems. And that's exciting. So we're seeing some of our work that we're doing that the teachers are seeing it in the classroom. So it will be interesting with some adjustments to our schedule. If we see slightly, some a positive increase in the percent of students who are proficient. The other challenge is we have I think a fairly high number of students opting out of taking the assessment, which makes it challenging. Now, it doesn't impact our results here. It impacts accountability. Now, it hasn't hurt us. The accountability is whether the school becomes a school in need of improvement. But it does influence, because if it's a very strong student that would have helped the cohort and they're not taking the assessment.
So those are
Yes.
parents opting their kids out of the standardized?
Yes,
Okay.
which is allowable under state law,
Okay.
but the federal government requires 95%
Right.
participation
Right.
for accountability.
Right.
So there are a lot of factors. So again, it's one piece of data, as Mike said, and I think that it's helpful as a board for you to know that there's not that there's a little bit of a difference in some places,
Sure.
and that we're working with the Mount Vernon board, but that, because that Mount Vernon cohort is so small, I think as a board, when you're seeing those overall results, there's not something hiding in them.
So I'd like to put things in context. Kristen and I met with the reading folks. There could be up to 19 days impacted by assessment between NEWA, between Aimsweb, between SAS. And that's when, when I started getting into this instructional time thing, it is when we lost so much time to assessment, we didn't increase instructional time to compensate. So it's precious, but if we lose to instruction, because one of the things that Christy and I laughed, there was a quote from Wiggins and McTighe, you don't increase the weight of a cow at weighing. Right.
More often, yeah.
And that's what we talk all the time. Do we use this? Is this data important for us? Do we use it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the return on this? Because we're spending time, we're spending instructional time.
Right.
And that's why when you look in the whole context of instructional number of days, if we lose
That's
19
a lot.
plus 10 to half,
That's a lot.
plus 5 to snow.
That's more than 10%.
That's
That's more than
35
10.
days of school
You're up to
impacted
15 to 20%.
that I really like. And I don't want to belabor because I know people are sick of me on this little topic. But there is a significant amount of time where we are weighing the cow.
Sure.
Jason?
Yeah, thanks. So I think I have questions and comments. So one thing I'm encouraged by is the 7th grade ELA, 77% at proficient or better. If we said that 80% is what we're shooting for, that's trending in the right direction. So I'm encouraged by that. Certainly concerned by the 8th grade percent at 57%, whereas state at 61%. That's quite a ways off track. So I think that's definitely where some efforts might need to be focused. And then Steve, I'm with you. I would love to have a more in-depth conversation at some point about which standardized tests are worth our,
Yep.
seeding instructional time to, and which, data points we're actually using, which ones we're not, and navigating that. I'm so happy to have that conversation if that is something that we do at the retreat or whenever, because I think it's probably a lengthy one. And then I had a question. I don't know if anybody can answer this question, but just looking at the math assessment, it seems like there's I don't know where the disconnect is, but there seems to be a disconnect where is approximately only a third of the state is proficient or above. Now we're achieving above that, but what is that disconnect? Is that a curriculum thing? Is that some mechanism within the test? I know we're not performing where we want to be performing, but it just seems like a bigger issue potentially.
I mean, I sit on our, state assessment task force, and the overall belief is, that some of this is certainly attributed to COVID. And we're starting to see, and they've done a really deep analysis with the state assessment scores and how much they've recovered. And they're recovering, but is it fast enough is really the question. And I could probably spend 2 hours doing the presentation and talking about this, so I certainly will not, but it is very interesting to look at it. And the other piece too is really looking at what the standards are actually requiring. And then also looking, Kathleen and I will have deep conversations around the actual items on the test and whether that's even developmentally appropriate for students at times. So we've been doing a lot of work really looking both at what is the level of expectation of the standard so that we're aligned to this assessment well, and our students are experiencing some of those. One thing we did this year, which we hadn't done in the past, we had our teachers practice the writing assessment in the system so AI could actually score it and provide the scores to the teachers so that the teachers can actually see what is this test expecting our students to do. And that was really interesting this year. So we've been trying to kind of tackle this in multiple different ways. We're really looking at, are we teaching, are our materials aligned to the standards? Do the teachers understand the breadth and depth of the standards? And then are there external influences that are impacting us with our scores? So we are trying to, get at this, but it is a tricky one because we're seeing some holes and gaps due to COVID in spots. We're sometimes seeing a cohort that just tends to be a cohort that their performance isn't the same as some of our other cohorts. So you kind of add that in and it gets even more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the 7th grade, by comparison to the 8th grade numbers is for in theory, for 2 grades that are relatively close together, that went through to, a year and a half or whatever, altered learning. The difference is wild.
Yeah, and that's the current, and I just want to clarify, that's our current 8th grade and our current 9th grade students in looking at these scores. But yeah, it's a startling difference. But if you also look at that cohort, with the exception of, you know, the 3rd, 4th grade, those 2 sets of
Right.
scores were a little bit closer. But that cohort, you know, one trended up and the other trended down, and I wish I knew how or why, but it did.
Before Tim, Mike had a response as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that, you know, I know people, for me, in my first year as superintendent, we kept talking about grace and space. This is absolutely a topic that we need some grace and space on. And, you know, I've had this conversation with different boards and different administrators. For me to feel really good about what we're talking about and what we're presenting in the analysis of it, we need to see how it goes through the fall, to the winter, to the spring. Get all that information from a K-12, you know, viewpoint and perspective. And then to Jason, to your point, have a longer conversation, presentation, at some point. We're thinking July. You know, it gives us some time to do that, gives us some time to grab all the data for the 23-24 year, look at previous years, and then have a more meaningful and fruitful conversation. And we, at that point, will have some real strong opinions on why we are the way we are when it's performing well, right, in pockets, and then maybe there's pockets throughout our district that we are underperforming for us. And that is something that, you know, I want the board and the people to know. And, but I do, to Christine's point, we could talk about this at length because it is a complicated, layered topic in public education. And you know, what I keep going back to is even the most seasoned and experienced and veteran educators have very different opinions on why things are good and why things are or might not be. And to be able to communicate that in a very logical, succinct manner, that is something that we want to get better at as an organization. And, you know, work with our boards and our stakeholder groups. Lots of factors into this, and you guys are just touching on more, like people opting out, right? And that version of it, so I would say absolutely more information to come on this. It is not done, but then we wanted to give this update because people were asking for it. And Tim, I didn't mean to cut you off. It was just on my mind when I was talking, so.
Mine is not as
go back
big as
to
that.
So.
No, mine is purely operational and I'm not entirely new here, but new enough to ask this. Are we not one-to-one because of money, philosophy, or community resistance to screen time?
So
Is it all of that?
what happened last year in the budget process, and it was different, so.
But like, sorry, I'm just,
Last year was-
so other districts have been,
It's primarily budget last year.
other districts have been one-to-one pre-COVID.
Yeah, but
For 5
there's
years.
actually research that says in some grades, one-on-one is contraindicated.
Okay,
Because of distraction and collaboration and peace.
okay.
And so that's, so, but so when Mike, one of his, you know, we have seen, I'll be pretty frank, the weaponizing of standardized test scores in the last 15, 18 months in my little time here. And to Kristen, and I've worked more closely with Kristen, I'm sure Kathleen said it, but Kristen and Mike are really trying to squeeze out as much of the environmental factor error that we can with connecting with kids, working with parents on reemphasizing. And I said this to Kristen, I'll change my language for this wonderful meeting. But Kristen has been very, very gracious with her former interim superintendent in that the testing schema in the past was not whole school at once. So you didn't need to be one-on-one entire school, but that was a disruption that cost more instructional time and it wasn't as emphasized when half the school is in a distraction mode and half the school is not. So to Kristen's credit, and that she's changed the testing scheme to squeeze out operational error. And what would have been, and she is incredibly gracious to me, she never once turned to me and said, Steve, I told you so, or Steve, we should have done this, because she is an incredibly wonderful person. So I made her life a lot difficult, but I really believed in the education line, Tom, and we talked about it as a board last year quite a bit, of going to 2-to-1 in 5th grade to increase collaboration. There was still opportunity to share between classes, so you 1-to-1 when you need it, 2-to-1 when you need it. But that was very difficult to test entire school at the same time with that. And so we're looking at that, not just, we're actually looking at how much the 2-to-1. I also, we're trying to build planning, we're trying to build flexibility in some of our areas. I'm not sure that I want on all of these areas, not out of lack of foresight. So it is something that we will look at. To be honest, we talked about, Mike led a discussion about early looks at fund balance.
Sure.
And I brought up that if we can save instructional time through a different testing schema.
No,
So maybe 1-to-1 might be more beneficial. I apologize for that long answer.
it was
a bad
just, no, it was just a question of whether not having 1-to-1 in 5th grade was purely budget plus philosophy, budget plus philosophy plus resistance from community. I'm just trying to make sure.
I would say budget plus philosophy, but now that has to adjust to the next generation after how we're looking at instructional time in the testing.
Perfect.
And it really is my.
No.
That was me as a joke.
I would have asked-
Joking.
I would have asked that question completely outside of the testing conversation. I just wanted to make sure I understood sort of.
Yeah.
You have been around long enough and seen enough budget discussions too, that commonly our first thing.
That's what I'm.
Next $150,000 increase, let's cut it to
If you would ask me that question and I said I can't do 1-to-1. But that's it.
Sounds right now like it's that 1 week, so I mean, I don't know.
Right, I wish that would be true, but I didn't get as much flexibility in planning and connections through the shared devices I was hoping for. And I'm not disparaging, people are busy. But when I met with people about this concept and about the education of last year that, I met through with the teams, Chris and I met about 5th grade and what we were doing. And we do have also at the same time, and I know Blair, I apologize, we have time where teachers are frustrated with the distractibility. But we've also implemented in the last 3 months a way to restrict website access in schools. There's a lot going on.
I understand. Thanks. I appreciate the conversation.
I feel good about
I'm sorry, Steve.
it. That's all right.
Okay,
I went on and on.
so we'll look forward to more conversation on that in the summertime, and Christine, thank you very much for the thorough explanations.
Thank you.
Steve as well. Moving on to our next item, this is a new committee that we started. Tim, you were gone at this meeting. We kindly nominated you for it because we know that there was some interest and some work that you had done on this. Terry also joined this committee as well. This is in regards to the Amherst School District properties that we own throughout this town. There's quite a bit of property. Tim has put together a slide deck. We're not going to review the slide deck in detail tonight, but Steve will scroll through it and it'll be available to review. Additional info was provided by Roger, our facilities director in SEU 39. The important thing is that we have a ton of properties. I would imagine by number of properties, we have to be one of the biggest property holders in the town, if not the largest, maybe outside of the town itself. That's purely speculation on my part, but that'll give you the scope as to the number of properties that we have, from little tiny parcels to Birch Park, to the schools, the buildings, the land, etc. So as Steve goes through this, one of the things that we wanted to do was have a committee to investigate what we should do for these buildings. And this is a multi-faceted approach because Terry and Tim, we're gonna assign you and task you, and Terry, if you want to jump off, or Tim, you want to jump off the committee, that's fine. We can find replacements, but I think this is going to involve a couple of different things. Number one, us looking at these properties, how we're utilizing them. Is it something that needs to be under school purview? The Brick School, for example, does, but Spalding Common, which sits between 122 and Founder Street, I believe it is, just sits there as a sort of a triangle wedge of land. Does the school need to be in charge of, or does the school need to own that? So number one, that's part of it. But number two, I think we need to expand the committee to include people from the town as well. Craig Fraley at the Recreation Committee has indicated that he would like to be part of this because there are buildings and properties that the Recreation Committee uses. I think we want to include somebody from zoning probably in this, maybe even the planning board and maybe even the selectmen, at least invite them to participate. So we can have a really robust discussion on what we have, what we want to sell potentially, what the town would want to take over if they're already maintaining it, et cetera. So with all that said, I will turn it to you, Tim, because you have put together a pretty lengthy presentation here and just a very detailed approach to get us on step one for this.
Yeah, so obviously, so some of them are obvious,
You want to just go through them, Tim, with you?
yeah, sure, we'll just go through real quick, right? So the brick school is a given, everybody knows what that one is. You know, I grabbed some of the information off of the towns, what that town had for information versus what we have for information, which shocker, sometimes doesn't match. The chapel, which obviously we don't currently use for school purposes, though it houses a fantastic museum. If you've never been, you
Never been
should.
in.
You literally go next, it's fantastic. We have that little one. Now that's on the same lot, right? So that's sort of a package deal. If the SAU were to ever, you know, be located somewhere else, then it's not just one building, we're really talking two. Obviously, the Historic District Commission would probably have.
Mike could
right?
put me in timeout of chapel.
What?
He could put me in
I'm
timeout.
out of the chat. So the next one down, I think I did Clark next. So thank you to Roger for filling in my gaps. I was, I have a habit of reading, old annual reports, which is always a good read. And so this is all of the information we have on when and what was added where and when to Clark. The town listed is 1880, by the way, so we may want to clarify that, because according to everything else, it's 1937, so it's only a small.
My son catcher says 1937, that's what I'm going with.
Okay,
That's
so-
that's the Bible.
So the town property card says 1880, so, anyway, so that's obvious, we know about that one. Spalding Field is the play field that's directly across, from that. Again, somehow, the date on that is 2000, it says the district acquired that. Was that a gift?
That's the right date.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I just thought it was odd that it was that new. The next one down is the Spalding Common. This is the infamous triangle. This is where we can put the cell tower and make a little side money.
In your back
Because schools are exempt from local zoning laws, so.
Put it right there.
Right smack in the middle. We can put one of those ones that looks like a flagpole. Nobody will complain. Right, so that's Spalding Common. Again, the question there is, do we mow it? Do they mow it? Do we make up for mowing something? I don't think we've mowed it. Anyway. Right, so this is, so the goats, we'll get goats. This is the Wilkins School property. Again, we're all familiar with that intimately right now. The difference in square footage, there is again, it doesn't really matter for purposes of our discussion, but the numbers don't match depending on what source. You look at, again, some history around that, thanks again to Roger for filling in some of that. Something was done in 77, I'm not really sure what. There's another reference to some upgrades in 2008. But anyway, so that's that one. The more fascinating part of that was that it almost read as if the town had paid for the upper field stuff.
That's a land water conservation grant.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah, so we can't ever
Okay.
build on that without replacing it somewhere in town.
That was the thing.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what the wording was on that, so that's all. Thanks. Keep going. AMS, right, that one's pretty easy. Again, here is everything that had been done at some point over at AMS. There's, to celebrate your 50th anniversary, you can drag out here's everything that's been done over there. So this is a fascinating little bit of parcel. For those of you that don't know, the Amherst School Board actually owns the land under Souhegan.
Right.
And
Lease
it,
to the Sohegan Cooperative.
a perpetual lease, but, which is a different question, that I purposely didn't raise. And then this odd little piece of land next to it.
Yeah.
Softball field.
What?
It's a field. Is that the softball?
No, it's
Yeah, it's a softball field
Oh, it is?
on Samin Wilson.
Oh, right, yeah.
Oh, so I never
It's a
noticed it
softball
was to the left?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I never know, I don't think that's, thank you. It looked wooded to me, so I was like, we just own wood.
That's a lit field as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, thank you very much. I will update my information on that. This was the transaction that got us the field, that's all. All right, thank you.
Okay.
So this is one of the pieces of property that's near AMS. There's three right next to that we also own. This one is unimproved. It's just a parcel of land, has no structures on it. The next two both have structures on it. We own two houses.
Do you think?
I don't know. So I know,
The bean house.
so
Yes.
I have tons of questions on a lot of this stuff. This is a nice 1960 modified ranch. Property that's owned, by the district, but I think used by the rec, or is that the next
No,
one?
no.
So that's ours. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, okay, so there's that one. The next one down is this is the rec. That's a nice 1972 sort of modernish, structure that's on.
1,000 square feet.
That's on that one. I could, well, so the other weird thing is that some of these things have basements. And so it may not be livable, but it counts as replaceable. If you had to replace it, you would want to replace your total square
New
footage,
actual
right?
contract.
So there's that one.
That might be selling us.
Wanna hit that one?
I'm good at this, right? I've done this.
Brent put that shed there.
I wasn't
wrong.
suggesting we owned it.
Okay, when I saw, I was like,
I'm just, so this is, part of the three parcels, that were off
I
of,
see.
Volusia Lake Road. The funniest part to me was that the acreage didn't match what Roger gave me, so I don't know if I'm missing a parcel, but I don't think I am. This is the one that's out front, the smaller of the three parcels that has the tiny little shed on it. And then the next two behind that are the two bigger tracks, that are also off of, the Volusia Lake. They have no road access. This would be the only way to get there. You're all familiar with that transaction. Those are the two of them, the 5-acre parcel, which looks bigger than 5, but that's what it says. And then the next one, is the bigger of the two at 12. So those are, those lots. The next one down, is of course Salhegan, which is technically listed, as Amherst School Board property, though there's a perpetual lease is the language on that with the Salhegan Cooperative.
I was always told it was a 100-year lease,
It depends on what,
which
For our
document.
intents and purposes, that would be perpetual for everybody in this room. I
right,
think.
correct.
I know.
I don't plan on being here for the renewal of that one, so, but the way it's read in some of the documents I found says perpetual versus a given, you may have to put a date on it. Maybe it's a 99-year lease and that's considered a perpetual lease.
Renews every year or something.
You know, I don't know how that works, but, because then remember, and the ones I didn't highlight are like this tiny little, no, go back.
Sorry.
So that's all right. So then, there's fields over here, right? And so one of these, that the town owns like that little triangle of that field, because I think this is the soccer field, right? Which should be right about there.
Yeah.
So it's like, they own that part, we own this half of the field.
Fascinating.
This is a public service right away. And so it's all like, there's this, right over there, it's a hodgepodge of who owns what. But anyway, so that's the holdings of your work. I didn't go dig up deeds and, so I have no idea what exists for lease agreements. You know, we can uncover all of that as we go down. that.
Yeah, and I think that's the next phase, Tim, and I appreciate you going through that and putting that together. It's a lot of work. I remember looking at this last year, just being shocked at the number of properties. I didn't go into the depth that you did, so I do appreciate that. So I think the next step is for you and Terry, if you can work in any assistance that we can provide as board members, making connections as well. Obviously, we just can't meet all together on this unless it's in a meeting. Making connections to really set up a committee to meet sometime in the late spring, maybe.
Sure.
Before summer kicks, to really look at this for the first time, start to finalize some of those, really find out what those agreements are. Maybe something we have to get into with town halls, and they may have records on it as well.
All right.
Just to find out what, who's supposed to mow Spalding Field.
So the other reason that it matters is in town of Antrim somehow owned the gym and the field so it's sort of similar to this type of setup. They physically own the gym. The district did not own the gym. And so there was this whole formal arrangement between who redid the floor and who split 50-50 or 60-40 for re-waxing and all, like lighting.
Yeah.
And so all of those arrangements were laid out in pretty formal agreements. So
Yeah, so I did speak with Craig Fraley,
Okay.
the rec department director, and he is very, he was grateful that, you know, to hear that this was happening and certainly wants to be a part of the
Great.
conversation. I think he'll provide a lot of information in terms of just the logistics of, well, yeah, the school owns it, but we, you know, maintain that.
Sure.
I would also think, that Roger would probably be a good person to loop into this, in terms of some of those informal things that are currently happening and whether or not they're documented, those are definitely too. And I think it's a good opportunity as we talk about, you talked earlier, Tom, about meeting with Peter Lyon and how can the town and the school. I think this is a perfect segue and opportunity and first step into kind of working together for the, you know, for the good of the community and figuring out how we're using these spaces.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I can send you Craig's.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Tim. And we have that presentation as well, so when we start to have these meetings, we can, maybe in March or April, we can piece together when we want to have the first committee meeting to make sure we have deadlines and get folks that are interested and necessary to join this to be able to come to a meeting and start setting dates and actually form a town-wide committee more than just, because I imagine historical society, all that's gonna have to be part of this.
Well, for those properties in the village.
But, yeah,
there's
in the
gonna be
village.
great interest in any discussion around.
I don't think they're gonna want to sell that triangle for a house there in the middle of the village.
Sell that.
Yeah.
Do we
All right,
pay
any other-
taxes on any of these?
What?
Are we
just see
exempt
Jason.
from taxes or do we pay for taxes on these?
No, yeah, the bigger educational institutions who are also exempt usually do what's called a pilot. So a payment in lieu of taxes. So, BU owns a massive tract of land in Hancock and complained that the road hadn't been repaved in a decade. And the town said, that's nice, but you don't pay taxes. And there's only 2 houses on that road, so it's not a priority for us to repave it. BU made a $40,000 payment in lieu of taxes, and then they paid the road. Like, so the larger educational facilities often engage with towns to make those types of payments. Northeastern University used to make a fairly sizable payment to the city of Boston, specifically for the fire department, because of the sheer number of calls that used to show up at the residence halls on Huntington Ave, and Hemingway Street. So that's normally how the larger institutions do that. We are exempt. School districts are also exempt from all zoning laws. There's that too. Not that we do anything that's outlandish or outrageous or would, but so that plays into it as well. Hence my joke about the cellular tower.
Oh, you joke, but if you leave me on this committee, I actually am highly in favor of a cell tower because we desperately need one.
I mean, you know, with the 5G, the new ones they make for 5G, you don't need to go up as high and they're much smaller. So there's actually shockingly some decent opportunity to cover. But
Yeah.
we can have those conversations.
Yeah, it's an April conversation.
Good. Thank you again, Tim, and thank you, Terry, for being part of that as well. And if you can get cell phone in my house, that'll be a great day, great day. T-Mobile told me there were trees, and that's why we don't have signal. So there are trees everywhere in this godforsaken state.
US Cellular.
How do we have any cell? So I
Go to
digress.
US Cellular.
Tim, you're still on the docket now. We have a couple of policies to discuss individually, and then we wanted to get into the policy review first. We'll start off with the ones here, IJOC, and then JICDAA/GBEBB. So if I can turn it over to you to lead us where we want to go down this path.
Will do. So IJOC, I have discussed with this board previously. This is the policy that deals with volunteers and then gets into the issue of designated volunteers. So the Amherst School Board policy was far more involved or developed, I would say, rather than the others in the SAU. And so the previous discussion was that it should largely remain unchanged. This is one of those policies that then had some of that robust conversation that we talked about because it overlaps with the policy regarding background checks. So you really can't talk about the volunteer policy without getting into the background check policy. And so there's a slightly different version of the designated volunteer definition that I worked with Christine on and I forget John or somebody, I forget, to craft, what would be an agreed upon definition of designated volunteer that would then be the same across. So there would be a senior
Across all districts or across this in the background check policy?
across all districts.
Okay.
And well, yeah, both really, because it'll be a reference instead of having to continually loop those if they change. So it's largely our designated volunteer with a little bit of a language change, and the caveat with regard to special projects, which would exempt things like the senior project. So right now, in theory, my neighbor who's serving as my son's outside expert would actually fall under the definition of a designated volunteer because it's regular, it's more than once, it's one-on-one with a student, and that's clearly not the intent of the statute or the policy.
Well, I'm reading through it now. Is this language that's changed? It says designated volunteer does not include individuals such as a senior project or other living.
That's the
It's a
new,
new concept.
that's
Thank you.
different than what ours was alone. So
Okay.
that's the change essentially that we're putting into the Amherst policy.
Yeah, and I think that the genesis of this was a few years ago, probably 2019. It's been a while since we reviewed this. This was a hot topic. It was actually had to be, it's probably been that long because it was before COVID, I believe. It's more of the elementary school than anything else. I mean, middle school, there's concern, certainly not as much in the high school with, doing that background check and being thorough, and the number of people that were in the school, maybe not daily, but definitely multiple times per week. There was extra concern making sure that those folks got background checks. So that's where the genesis of this came in, or the nexus of this. So I don't know that changing that language is tremendously impactful to the elementary school product, but that was the reason that we wanted to tighten this up and really restrict this language because of the sensitivity of adults around young kids.
So it,
Correct, and that's why the policy committee and Tim and I agreed that the policy that Amherst had paid money to develop to be a little tighter was the way to go.
Yeah, I would
With
agree.
just those tweaks to kind of make it.
Yeah.
It's just the definition change.
Yeah, right.
so that's what you see before you is how it would read with that, with the agreed upon
Okay.
definition, inserted. That's
Yeah.
the only change in that policy.
You have to, it's just, we can vote on this tonight, then, correct? To
You
accept this as
absolutely
is.
can vote
Okay,
on this.
do you want to make a motion to approve this, and we can open it up for discussion with
Yep.
Terry and Jason if they have.
Yep, so I would move to approve, policy IJOC, which is the amended volunteers policy.
I have a second from Shannon. Any questions or comments, Jason or Terry? Okay. I know, Terry, you were on the board at the same time I was when this was being discussed, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I totally remember the same as you, that why we originally wanted to tighten it up. And I think that was a great meeting in the middle to kind of carve out that for the older students so that they could have, in essence, a stronger policy as well. We could be consistent, but that we still make allowances for them having their own special circumstances. So I think it's a great compromise.
I think it also makes sense because if you're having a senior project and you're doing work outside of the school, how do we have any authority over who can meet with the student and, yeah, people. Okay, all right, without any further comments, I will call a vote on this. Terry, if you want to start with a roll call vote.
Beam, yes, and thank you to policy committee for all of the many hours you put into these things. I know it's a heavy lift, that particular committee.
White, yes.
Dr. Burge, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Gothier, yes. Next policy, Tim.
So the next one on here is the staff-student interaction, right? No.
No, this is,
Oh, that's.
yeah, it says
that's not the right-
staff-student interaction.
That's not us.
I'm not sure if that was, I was trying to figure, I was just whispering to Steve on this, I was trying to figure out what happened.
Did I?
That's all right. It was supposed to be.
Was it JCA?
The one to do with, the background checks. JCA, sorry, that's the school,
Manifest hardship.
that's the manifest
It's
hardship.
there. It's there in the packet.
That's in the packet, yeah.
Oh, is this just an extra one?
I think it just got
That's
added,
not
that one, yeah, that's an erroneous add, the rest of
Okay.
these. So the rest of these are all,
From the.
are all from the SAU meeting the other night, so it's Sorry, just not that one. So it's EBV, which is the school safety program, followed by, the indoor air quality one, which is EBBD. The background check is the other one. So GBCD is the other one that's related to our volunteer, discussion. And the change here, these two had a bunch of cross-pollinated stuff. And so if you're a volunteer, our thought process was, I want to go read the volunteer policy. I don't want to have to then go read the background check policy. So the change here is that the definition of designated volunteer isn't in this policy. It simply refers back over to the IJOC. So we will be able to make any change we want or have to based on law changes or whatever to the volunteer policy without having to deal with the background check policy. That was the agreed upon approach by the committee. So this would be the other one that we should also.
Yeah, I see that in there. Please see definition policy IJOC.
Correct,
Okay.
that's the shift. The others are just updates of changes because of changes to statute that came out for the other two that we had to update.
The other two policies or the other two items in this particular policy?
No, this policy was just.
Just that one, okay.
Just that one change.
So you're referring to, I just had it and I lost it.
EBB and
BD, got it.
Are changes as a result of state law change.
Okay, and then IJL?
And then IJL. JCA first.
We just had IJL listed on the thing,
Oh.
JCA is in the packet next.
Yeah, I don't see IGL.
I don't remember.
What was that?
May just been an accidental add to this.
I think that-
IGL was not central
IGL.
resources.
That is the instructional resource.
Oh, that was that one.
We've already approved that one.
Yeah, we did that, we did that,
That-
yeah, Monday night, that's why, we did that Monday night as approving that one, so that one is good to go.
Correct.
So just
So
JCA,
JCA is the, has to do with best interest and manifest hardship. Sure, I'm reading from my version. So this has to do, again, when somebody approaches the superintendent, and says, I want you to put my child in a different school, but there's two different standards. The first is best interest, the second is manifest hardship. So there's a couple of things that we did here. The first was that wherever possible, again, to avoid changes that happen, is to reference the RSA specifically over which schools are eligible. And so essentially it just says, to another public school or public academy within the district, or to another school that meets the requirements of RSA 193:3. So that makes it clear that it's anything that's over there, doesn't lay all of that out here. Those are subject to change. And so that's why we did that in this part here. The other thing we did was try to be as specific as we could. The statute talks about having to take certain actions within a certain number of days. And in some instances doesn't specify school days. Is it business days? Is it wherever? And so that matters because there's a difference between school days and business days and calendar days and all of that. So wherever we had to stick to calendar days, it sticks to calendar days. Where it doesn't, then I think we went with school days was the language we used because that was more appropriate than business days at times, especially if that stuff is happening over there. So, and so that was the change to that. The other big change that is in the policy is with regard to transportation. And that is that if it is transportation for a student reassigned to another school in another district under this section A, which is the manifest hardship one, right? We will not be paying the transportation.
now, is that obviously that fits in the statute within the state?
And that was
Does mandate that?
that council also said that that was something we absolutely could do. Should do.
Okay, so it's not going to be based on where that student goes. If we decide that we're gonna provide transportation, it's no transportation unless it's mandated, and that's generally going to be a special education type of transportation need anyway, typically, I would imagine.
And the special education wouldn't fall
That
under
doesn't fall
best
under
interest or
this.
manifestation, that would be.
Okay, so these are
under
separate.
process. So under this process, the statute, and as Tim said, council says it is not required by statute. Got the ambiguity, he says, to clear it up in policy.
And so this cleans up that ambiguity. And so that's the change.
Okay, so I will take a motion to accept these, unless you had any other talking points on it, Tim. I'll take a motion to accept these policies as presented and amended tonight.
I would make that motion.
Tim has the motion. Shannon has the second. Any further discussion, Jason or Terry?
I have a question. So on the transportation piece, so if it's in best interest, we are on the hook for transportation, correct?
No, advice of counsel is no.
Best interest or manifest hardship?
That is correct.
And now would best interest, would special education fall under either of these categories? Okay, so it's an entirely separate category.
It is.
Okay.
Okay, so if we were
Uh,
sending out of district for special education, then we would be responsible. But
Potentially,
Correct.
potentially, it would be up to the team.
okay, best interest, that's not traditionally how I've seen it. In cases that I've been involved with as a CASA, it's normally the sending district that's on the hook for footing that bill. So you're sure they told us we don't have to? That
Yes, I'm sure that the advice of counsel last year was to redo the policy with that statement.
okay, if council told us that, I suppose so. That surprises me, but I'm willing to not be the expert here.
All right, so without any further questions, we'll call the vote. Terry, you can start.
Sure, Beam, yes.
White, yes.
Burge, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Gothier, yes. So that will take us to the end of policy. I'm gonna go back to my agenda. Bear with me for one quick second. Believe we are at the end of the agenda tonight. So no, the last item that we have is approving the 24-25 school calendar. We all saw this on Monday night. We've had a chance to take a couple of days to look at this. Anybody have any further questions for Mike on this calendar, approach, philosophy, et cetera? Anything that we want to add before we can call a vote to approve this at the Amherst level tonight, if the board is comfortable with that?
I appreciate that you guys listed out the early release times on
I
the
did that.
calendars again.
I
I
nailed
know,
that.
it's so good.
I
It's
nailed
helpful. It's great. So, yeah, no questions or just that little comment.
I have a question.
Okay. Terry?
Are we really having graduation on Friday the 13th? High school graduation? I just now
Yes.
noticed that.
Yes,
That's kind of awesome. I
lucky day.
Yeah, no, it looks like that is what's gonna happen.
One quick question on this, Mike. We have first day, last day. We have last day twice, the 12th and the 20th. Is the 20th Souhegan's last day?
No, 20 snow days.
Right.
Like, so right now,
If you have 5 snow days, that's how you get to 20.
Okay, so the 20th is just a potential last day if we have 5
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. That was that
Got it.
comment we made the other night, that should be listed as,
And
people should see that
and
clearly.
we put a red.
That's
so
why I liked it red.
So there's no variation.
You get a dummy like me, red, and thinks we have 2. So snow.
you gotta read the size 3 font.
I can still see it. I'm happy with that.
I know we talked about it on Monday and when we went through, I think other districts are taking a look at this notion of trying to disrupt instruction. So other districts may join, align with this early release reduction. So I think if the Amherst has done some good work, negotiations and focus on this, that other districts may look at it as well.
When we have these, so the early release days, we're the only ones doing these now? Or just even for the last days?
No,
So the early releases right now, but remember, every board is going to prove it individually.
Correct.
And so there is still some progress in other boards about taking a look at early releases.
They currently have 10.
So it's not early release, late start. They're all early releases right now. It's just the frequency of them.
Correct.
So this will still impact transportation if those other boards decide not to go or they can't, pull all the levers to go there. It's going to increase transportation costs. Now, I would assume that if Souhegan, as an example, decides they don't want to do early releases and they want to have 10 early releases, I would assume that dispersion of costs would be allocated accordingly to the towns. It would be those buses and Amherst would pay a reduced fare because we're not, 600 or 800 of our kids are not going to, 1,200 of our kids are not going to.
So it's an extra run. That's what it's just an extra run. So it is possible that Mount Vernon or another district may join, and that would
that would make those bus runs, but we can differentiate cost by bus run by district.
I know it's complicated to do that, but I just want to be, because we're obviously adding an extra PD day at the beginning of the year, we're adding an extra school day, so now we have 3 different end days at this point, so there are costs that are gonna be baked into this, and I certainly don't want more educational time to cost us for something silly with, with an early release schedule comparatively to another school district, so.
And also, the way we track it, for example, we've learned that if we lose for 2 weeks a bus, we only run 14 buses instead of 15 for 2 weeks. Because they have to commingle them together because there are other drivers, right? That happens quite a bit. Those are all credits.
Yep.
So it is conceivable that because we have so many credits by the joining reduction of 15 runs that we pay for by contract, that the extra runs during these early release days will be a push. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they actually do track it that way. And we have, I think, I mean, you know this world more than I do. But I think we've had to cobble together 2 buses for weeks. And so that's a reduction of a run for 15 days. That's a day.
Yeah.
You with me?
Yeah.
So Amy and I and Mike and Christian, when we talk about this, I'm not losing sleep over the cost of this because you can anticipate the cobbling together and savings within the contract itself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? But I just appreciate the work and the community's gonna be a little funky with 3 end days, but it meets the goals and we'll have alignment, appreciate it.
And I don't remember if I asked this Monday, I don't think I did, I think I asked it in a previous meeting, but I presume the not before Labor Day is very much a community position. That
So-
people have planted that flag upon, is that an accurate description?
And I think there's language.
Is that, but, sorry, I should have asked, the follow-up question of this, is it also contractual?
Correct.
It's best efforts.
Okay.
But I'm gonna talk, so this in this contract, Labor Day is 2. Next year is 1.
Right.
Year after that, we're not starting up.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
7. I think it
Right, that
really
was
is
the
a
conversation.
1,
That's
2,
it.
3,
Thank you.
4, the board bid 6, 7, no, but 5, 6, 7, no.
I think we have to look at that, Steve, because I think when we were doing the AEA contract last year, they can only start so many days before
Correct.
Labor Day, so that includes, we're starting school before Labor Day. That include, their teacher days can only start so many days before Labor Day, so that has to be.
So everything will get pushed,
Right.
Thanks.
if that's the case, right? And
That was my question.
that's the funny thing, there's some contractual obligations to it, and there's.
I wasn't sure if it was purely contractual or if it was.
But there's a large
the community
sentiment.
Had planted their flag.
There's a large sentiment in this,
Okay.
this community that thinks post Labor Day start is ideal and what they want.
Okay.
And so we're gonna continue to work with the organizations and the towns to do that.
That's just that.
But Steve did paint a good picture. If you start that late, you can't, right? And so
So you're going late.
that's where
20s?
compromise,
Chris.
so.
But I'm glad for Mike, for this year and next, it's 2-1.
Sure, sure.
Doesn't kill you after that.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah. All right, great. Did we do the motion?
I believe we have, let's get a motion. I don't think we did that, so.
Uh,
Get a motion to accept the approved 24-25 calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All right, roll call vote, Terry.
Beam, yes.
White, yes.
First, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Gothier, yes. Calendar is approved. Our final item tonight is our final public comments. Seeing nobody in attendance tonight. I don't see anybody else on Zoom that would, actually, I do see some folks on Zoom. So if you'd like to address the board tonight, make a public comment, you'll have 3 minutes. If you are on Zoom, please turn on your camera, have your full name and your avatar, and then when you come on, we'll give you 3 minutes. Going once, going twice, and gone. So we will close our public comment, our second session of the night. Christine and Kathleen, thank you very much for joining us. We do have a non-public tonight, so I will take a motion to go into non-public.
I'll make that.
I have a motion from Shannon,
Second.
second from Tim. Can I get a roll call starting with Terry?
Beam, yes.
White, yes.
Yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
And Gothier, yes. We are in non-public at 7:33.
Be
Thank
careful
you
going
for
up the
listening.
stairs.